that's mine. You can't have it. There's a saying that says you've got to stand for something or you'll fall for anything. 37 years ago, there was a man named Wayne Kreitz. He was a farmer in Puxico, Missouri. He found himself in the fight of his life. He had stored 32,500 bushels of soybeans in a local grain elevator. And we found months later that the owners of the elevators went bankrupt. Well, this concerned Mr. Kreitz very much because he had a great investment there. And a federal bankruptcy lawyer was going to sell all the soybeans to pay off all the bills of the grain elevator owners. And we find that this is where the story begins. I'd like to inform you about this farmer named Wayne Kreitz. I'd like to tell you about his life. I'd like to tell you about his world one day being turned upside down. I'd like to tell you of the actions that he takes in order to fight for his property. And finally, I'd like to discuss with you the trials that he went through to get to where he was at. The life of Wayne Kreitz is one of courage and perseverance to fight for the property that he thought was rightfully his. Mr. Kreitz truly shows that one man can make a difference. The story of Wayne Kreitz's life. In 1979, Mr. Kreitz had got through harvesting there in the fall and was going to take his beans, the 32,500 bushels, to the Ristine grain elevator in New Madrid, Missouri, to store them. He had actually two options in regards to that. One option was to be able to go and sell the beans right away to the owners at the elevators and get whatever was the price was going in, or his other option was to store the grain there in the elevators until the price peaked and he was able to sell at a better price. Mr. Kreitz decided to go ahead and store them there in the grain elevators. And I thought the elevators owners, they issued warehouse receipts, kind of like state titles, showing that Wayne owned those soybeans. The estimated worth of his soybeans was $350,000. Now that I've briefly discussed the life of Wayne Kreitz, I want to tell you about the day his world was turned upside down. One afternoon, Wayne's wife Sandy was watching the local news when the story broke that the Ristine grain elevator had went bankrupt there near New Madrid, Missouri. Wayne was very concerned because he had the $350,000 worth of beans that belonged to him that was going to pay all the debts that he had throughout the year of farming and to be able to survive for the next year. And we find that a federal judge in Arkansas named Charles Baker took jurisdiction over the case, and he wanted to sell those soybeans to pay off the debts of the owners at the grain elevator. We find that all the beans that Mr. Kreitz had was going to be sold, and he was going to be penniless. He was not going to have anything out of this. And Mr. Kreitz said, "Hey, wait a minute. This is my property. That's my private property there. You can't take it." Next, I'd like to discuss the actions that Mr. Kreitz took to keep his property. He knew that his beans was at risk. He knew he had to do something. It was a time in his life that he said to his family that he was going to have to stand and fight this thing through for what belonged to him. I thought February 16, 1981, Mr. Kreitz, that was the day that he went to the grain elevators to take out his beans. Months before that, we find that Mr. Kreitz had got together with a bunch of farmers from around the states, and they got together and made that day, February 16th, as a date to go. They all showed up. 2,000 to 3,000 people come to help Mr. Kreitz to take his beans out of that elevator. And as they got to the grain elevator, the U.S. Marshals was waiting for him there and told him that, they had a court order saying that he could not come in on the property. Well, Mr. Kreitz went ahead and proceeded to the grain bins, and they had an evacuator there and tore the roof off, some tin off of the grain bins, and they started sucking out the 32,500 bushels of beans that belonged to Wayne. According to the story, February 17, 1981, that news article from the Southeast Missouri paper, Wayne Kreitz removed them beans successfully from the Ristine grain elevators near New Madrid, Missouri. Finally, I'd like to discuss the trials and the outcome of Mr. Kreitz's battles. According to Jerry Hobbs, his 2005 book, One Man with Courage, The Wayne Kreitz Story, the Battle of the Beans began in 1981. The judge didn't take very kindly to Mr. Kreitz taking the beans, and so that began the trials of Wayne's life there. A news article from March 21st, 1985 from the Associated Press stated that the Battle of the Beans went on for over 4 years. During that 4 years, Mr. Kreitz had many court trials. He had many things that he went through. One day in court, the judge asked him to divulge all the names of those farmers that helped him get that soybeans out of the grain bins, and Mr. Kreitz refused to do so, so they found him in contempt of court, put him in jail, and he was there for approximately 1 month in jail. But during that time, Bill Clinton, the governor of Arkansas, came and spoke with him, and also he was asked to come to Washington, D.C. to a subcommittee, and there he argued the point that there needed to be rights for the farmers on their property to protect them. The Kreitz made a very huge impact. He set a precedent that changed the federal bankruptcy law to protect the farmers. In conclusion, we've seen the tragedies and triumphs of Mr. Kreitz's battles over the beans.